Sunday night Safran, a babble about religion, politics and all things ethnic, with John Safran and Father Bob Maguire.
Hello dear listeners, hello Father Bob Maguire.
Yeah, I'm all right.
Tonight, everything is trans. Everything is trans men and trans women. Now, Bob, let's start off by listening to this fight on CNN. This is Piers Morgan, a CNN journalist.
So I ask you, Janet Mock, to explain to me why you didn't say anything during the interview, why you seemed quite happy with it afterwards, why you then felt the need to tweet quite hostile tweets in my direction, which then sparked this furore amongst the transgender community, because I feel pretty peeved about it.
Now, Father Bob Maguire...
He sounds peeved, doesn't he?
Charles Mock was born in 1984, and he felt like he was a woman. He was female from a very young age, and then he started living life as a woman and started referring to himself as Janet Mock. And then at age 18, he had gender reassignment surgery, and now she lives as Janet Mock, and she's probably the most prominent transgender spokeswoman in America. Do you know what I just said then, Bob?
What did you just say then?
Do you know what I just said then was as offensive to some transgender men and women as if I screamed the N-word in a room full of black people.
Yeah.
Because some transgender men and women, they want the narrative of their life to be not only are they now, in the case of Janet Mock, a woman, but they were always a woman from the moment they were born. And and people within the wider community have to both say and believe that. So this episode of Sunday Night Safran, we're going to look at who decides on narratives and stories. If you assert that you want something and your life to go down that way, does everyone have to go along with your story?
That is the question.
If you're a Buddhist and you believe the Dalai Lama was reincarnated, does the rest of the world have to go along with that because you're asserting that, or not? How do stories work? How does the English language work? Is the fact that we have, for thousands of years, looked at concepts of men and women a certain way, means you can't just pull on the handbrake and suddenly have words mean concepts that are different.
But then there's the other side. I'm not going to go any further. The critic will say, however, if the person is not born a woman,
yes,
it's a bit late to start saying, excuse me, I and my sisters would like to say the following, because if you're not born a woman...
I'm already confused, Bob.
I know, but I was confused, but I was delighted as well, because it sounds as though we've come a long way. And in the olden days, black people were considered like not a full human. That was the perception. And then, obviously later, it was like that is such an offensive thing, and now they're considered a full person. So is this some equivalent of that? That we didn't consider transgender women to be real women, and now we should? Or is it not? And just say there's competing interests. Just say there's women who say, well, actually, I think men are powerful, and I think a man who believes he's a woman is still a man, and I do not welcome him as a woman. So whose side do you go on then, left-wing pinko? Do you go on the side of the transgender community, or do you go on the side of the feminist community? Now, are we coming out tonight?
We have got so many great
public?
Guests. Number one is Professor Sheila Jeffreys.
Yes.
She teaches sexual politics and international feminist politics. And she does not want to welcome, she's a feminist, and she does not want to welcome transgender women into
her
No,
female,
that's what I was saying.
Her female community.
Thank you.
We then, as our second guest,
Yeah, passing each other in the corridor, I
have
presume.
Sean Flannery. Mm-hmm. He, and he is how he would like to be referred, has been transitioning for almost 2 years. And he's going to come in and tell his story. And even doing that introduction somehow gets to one of the nubs of the problem. The easiest way to explain who Sean is would be for me to say Sean was born a female and is now transitioning to a male. That would seem the simplest way, and that's what the English language is for. But that, the simplest way to say it, for me to articulate that idea to you listeners, is utterly offensive to transgender women like Janet Mock. And finally, we're going to be talking to a journalist.
You're going to end up in a brawl here.
With Jeff Sparrow. Jeff Sparrow has no particular expertise on transgender issue, but he is an author and a journalist. He's the editor of Overland, and he likes to do the right thing. Mm. That's a progressive publication, and he likes to see himself on the side of angels, and so I'm going to kind of tease out of him about what he thinks about the issue of who gets to tell the story of transgender
Indeed.
men and women. I mean, a journalist's obligation is to tell the truth as he or she sees it. So what happens if he or she thinks there's a fairly strong argument that Janet Mock was born a boy? So stick around, dear listeners.
Sunday Night Safran talks trans. Triple J.
You are listening to Sunday Night Safran on Triple J with myself, John Safran, and that guy there, Father Bob Maguire. Tonight we'll be asking a whole heap of transgender questions, including this one.
Explain to me why it is so offensive for somebody like you who grew up a boy until you were into your teenage years and your family treated you as a boy and you were biologically a boy, that you then have gender reassignment surgery and you become a woman. The phrase gender reassignment means that you had a sex change operation. Here's where I want to learn. I want to learn why it is so offensive to actually just say that you grew up as a boy and you then, because you've always felt that you were female, you had surgery to become a woman, to become a real woman, as you say in the book. Why is it offensive?
That was CNN journalist Piers Morgan probing famous American transgender woman Janet Mock on why she finds it offensive to be called a former boy. We'll ask that and many more questions of our guests tonight, including Sean Flannery, who has been transitioning for the past 2 years. And if you've got a question about trans issues, hit us up on Twitter at John Safran, at Father Bob, or at Soipel, Soipl. She's our producer. Also tonight, we'll explore whether journalists and writers have to go along with the narratives that minority communities want them to go along with. We'll have journalist and author Jeff Sparrow, and he'll drop by to dissect a writer's responsibility.
This is Sunday Night Safran on Triple J with myself, Bob Maguire, and John Safran. And joining us right now is Professor Sheila Jeffreys. She's a lecturer in sexual politics and international feminist politics, and she's also the author of Gender Hurts. Hello, Professor Jeffreys.
Hello. How are you? Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, once you start typing on the internet about this issue of transgender politics and transphobia, one of the unexpected things that a novice, a layperson like me, comes across is that there are feminists who are a bit cold and a bit dark on the idea of transgender women coming into the circle and being considered women. Because I guess, like a lot of people, I'm like, oh, well, feminists, they're arguing for, justice and for an oppressed people. And so transgendered women and men, like it's pretty easy to come up with stats that show that they have like a higher suicide rate and they're discriminated against in the workforce. So, you just think they'd be buddies, but that's not the case. And in fact, you often get in trouble when you go to speak and you get your talks. I believe you've even had death threats.
I haven't had exactly a death threat. I've had a can of pesticide with my face on it saying "kill rad femmes now," which is not exactly a direct death threat, but it's true whenever I'm put on to speak about all kinds of things. Normally I don't speak about transgenderism. I never have. This is pretty much the first time. I talk about prostitution, lots of other things. What happens is that the people who've organised for me to speak get a lot of hate mail. The venues at which I'm due to speak get hate mail, occasionally Molotov cocktail threats. Often the names and addresses of the staff at that particular venue are put online so that they can be harassed. And it's not just me. Jermaine Greer was glitter bombed the year before last, and so on. So anybody who's ever seen any feminists who are seen as having been at all critical of transgenderism, there's a campaign by transgender activists and their friends who identify as having queer politics to stop those feminists from being able to speak.
And it's actually happening at the very moment that Marique Hardy, who I'm sure our listeners will have heard of, that she organises a nice little event called Women of Letters, which is about bringing women together to speak, and you were invited to that. And that ended... yes, and Marique's getting a lot of heat about inviting you, even though I gather you're not there to talk about transgender issues.
And indeed, I'm not going to talk about it.
So what is the tension between the transgender issues and feminist issues as you see it?
Well, if we think back to the 1970s when very few men transgendered, because it's a particular social and historical construction which has become very much larger at the end of the 20th century. Before the mid-century it wasn't really happening because you need science, you need hormones, you need cosmetic surgery and so on. In the 70s very few men were doing it, but when they did come into feminist spaces, because for a lot of these men it's very important to be recognised as women by other women, so-called. So they often come into those spaces. And in the States, for instance, they were often compared with the black and white minstrels. The black and white minstrels were white men who dressed up with blackface to imitate what they thought were the behaviours of black singers and entertainers. That was seen as very insulting by the black community. It was seen in the 1970s by the vast majority of feminists as incredibly insulting.
And so just summing that up, because I did see another feminist talk about that online on a little clip, and she was saying that I can't be trans black, so right. Why can a man be a trans woman?
Actually, it is happening now. There's trans species and there's trans ethnic, there's trans everything, because there's a lot of sexual fantasy material in particular on the net. So there's lots and lots of websites about lots of trans identities. But in fact, trans ethnicity is seen as racist and insulting. But the fascinating thing is that when men say they're women, and of course you're probably aware that for hundreds of years men have been telling women what they are through psychiatry and the church and so on. And feminists was breaking out of this. Feminists said, we'll say who women are. We won't accept your ridiculous stereotypes. When men come along and use those stereotypes to say I'm a woman because I like frilly dresses or whatever, that's really not acceptable to many women. But it's very, very dangerous to say that is sexist. I would say it's not just sexist, but it is homophobic, because the two varieties of men who transgender, some are homosexual who don't feel able to be homosexual in the bodies of men, and so quite a lot of gay men are beginning to realise now that it's very much about homophobia. The vast majority, though, are heterosexual men who have a sexual interest in wearing women's clothes and having the appearance of women. And so it's about sexism and homophobia. But we're not allowed to talk about the politics of it, really. We're only allowed to talk about the stories of individuals and feel sorry, as I genuinely do, for the life's experience of those men who have this form of very serious mental distress.
And I guess one complicated thing about talking about this, and as you said then, is that you don't necessarily, or people don't necessarily think that transgender men or women are a powerful group, or that what they're going to demand is going to happen. So sometimes you feel a bit uncomfortable, like putting a counterpoint, because you're not saying it. It's not like having a go at George W. Bush or John Howard, but you can have a separate conversation, which is like keeping that in mind.
But they are a powerful group in the sense that many of them are lawyers, not all of them have internet skills. One of them has now become a judge in the States. I'm sure there are others. They're men, and because men are often in these positions of power, they do have a lot of influence. So they have got huge legal change. For instance, in this country and in many countries in the Western world, the vast majority of these men, we must remember, still have their penises, so they're biologically and entirely male. But they now are getting the rights to be in women's refuges, to be in women's toilets, to be in women's prisons, and so on. They're getting legal changes that enable this.
And do you feel that women in women's prisons or women in domestic violence shelters or whatever, that they're uncomfortable if a transgender woman comes into their space? Or is this something you're uncomfortable with because you're
political about it, but
No.
most women are actually
No.
okay.
I mean, we have situations where, for instance, in one refuge in Australia, a man who had transgendered was put into a room with another woman. That woman would not be with him, so they actually had to have him on his own, even though there were many women wanting space, and they had to not be able to admit some women because the man had to have the space on his own. Women don't wish to be in a room with an entire man, especially if they've experienced violence from men, even if that man says that he has the identity of being a woman. It doesn't make a lot of difference to her situation of safety.
Just this week, a British comedian who is a transgender woman was stopped at the airport in Canada because she didn't have the right visa, and they had to take her to a jail, and they didn't know what to do. They first said, "We have to put you in a male jail because that's what our instructions say." And then she argued, and there were politicians there who argued. They said, "Well, it's not safe for a transgender woman to be in a male jail," and then she was moved to a female jail. So it is, as I've brought up before, that expression I like, a battle, a clash of political correctness.
It's a clash of rights. Transgenderism for men is about the right to imitate and pretend to be members of the subordinate class, even though they're members of, biologically, and were brought up in the superior class. They pretend to be members of the subordinate class. Now, that was problematic for the black and white minstrels. It's problematic generally when a group of people claim to be another subordinate group of people. It's not like they're homosexuals or any other group of oppressed people. They're actually seeking to be and sort of have the bodies of members of an oppressed group.
And what about the argument that gender is different to sex? I must admit, I don't quite have my head around this, but so I'm no expert in this. But gender is different to sex, and therefore, if people are feeling like they're a woman, then that's enough, or things like that.
That's how it's seen now. Way back in the 70s, it was called transsexualism, and it was expected that men would have surgery, would have their genitals removed, and so on. As a result of queer politics and the development of a transgender movement in the 90s and later, now men can call themselves transgender and say they're women if they do cross-dressing for sexual excitement 2 hours on the weekend, and as I say, the vast majority are intact.
Do you think there's lots of situations where no harm is done if the wider community just goes along with the narrative that a transgender man or a transgender woman wants us to go along with? Like, I imagine in a personal workspace. In fact, definitely, I've been in a workspace, and separate to that, I have a friend. The friend is a transgender man. In the workspace, it was a transgender woman, and in both of those, for the sake of personal communication, like, I got it. It's like, okay, that's what. And then you kind of use the pronoun he and she, the pronoun that they want, and what's wrong with that?
I don't use the pronoun that these people say that they want, because for me it's important politically and in terms of the ideas that people express when I'm talking about their books and actions and so on, to be able to identify that they are male-bodied persons with a male perspective, meaning they've been brought up in the body of a man, they have that particular headspace. It's been very important for feminists to talk about what was a woman's perspective. We have a view of the world because of the way we're treated in the street, in the workplace, from the moment we're born and so on. So when men say that they want to be called she, I think that's problematic, not in the workplace, in a personal situation. But if they're speaking and writing in public, it's important to be able to identify that they are male-bodied persons, reared as male-bodied persons with male privilege.
And what about how the world's complicated? There's takes all types, lots of different nuances going along, so it's best not to, I guess, poke the hornet's nest of this, and just as much as we can, just allow the way people self-actualise to be the way that we look at them.
I'm afraid that's not possible for feminists, because there are quite a few of these men are now calling themselves feminists. They are actually in universities teaching women's studies. They're at conferences speaking. And what they do is say that we must protect femininity. Well, feminists don't protect femininity. We want the abolition of gender. We want the abolition of the idea that women are a certain kind of person who can't drive and likes frilly things and so on. So we obviously need to fight that in the name of equality. Whereas these men who are interested in and are sexually excited excited by those sorts of things actually defend them. So there's a clash happening ideologically at a very basic level. Feminists like myself want to abolish gender, and men who transgender because it's interesting and pleasing to them, they have to fight to preserve it. So unfortunately, that's a pretty much head-on clash.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, you haven't done the Women of Letters thing yet, have you?
No, I haven't.
So people, if they want to see you speak, they should go...
But not about this.
But not about this?
I shall be singing, actually.
Oh, you'll be singing?
Oh. Yes.
What will you be singing?
I shall be singing To Be a Lesbian to the tune of To Be a Pilgrim and other treats.
Oh, beautiful.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And, dear listeners, stick around because all this evening we're going to be talking transgender, men and women, and who gets to decide, who gets to write the narrative of their lives.
Sunday Night Safran talks trans. Triple J.
You're listening to Sunday Night Safran. I'm John Safran, and with me is Father Bob Maguire,
Yes.
who occasionally, in promotionals, remember you take the role of a nun.
Oh, I used to in the old days.
What's her name?
Sister Roberta.
The Sister Roberta.
Well, I can't do that
that's kind of
tonight, for God's
thematically
sake.
for the show.
I know it is, but I mean, it's offensive.
Still to come on tonight's show, you'll meet Sean Flannery, a 27-year-old trans man who'll tell his transitioning story. And I guess that will be a bit of a counterpoint to our guest that we had on
Well, we'll
first.
have to see what happens.
Sunday Night Safran talks trans. Triple J.
Father Bob Maguire,
Totally confused.
what do you reckon this means?
What?
I was thinking, when I was little, you know, like you do things when you're a kid and you're not really overthinking them. And then, but like, after the fact, you're like, what did that mean? I remember one, it was either Halloween or it was a similar thing. It was something like, maybe it was a pub crawl. It was like in Cubs or whatever. And I dressed up as a woman. And I just went, I think I dressed up as a girl guide. I'm not sure you even had to dress up for this thing.
Yeah.
It was like this crawl where we went from house to house in Cubs. And for some reason, I decided to dress up as a girl guide. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's all right. It doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
You just like to be an actor. A little bit of, you know what I mean?
Yes.
But in my profession, of course, you're blessed because, in fact, you can dress up regularly by wearing flowing robes and things. Huh?
Sure.
You haven't investigated that, I presume, in your in-depth study about transism.
No, I haven't looked
Thank
into
you
the
for
Father
that.
Bob Maguire
Not the Father
question.
Bob Maguire, the generic clerical
Sure.
dress. You see what I mean?
Yes.
We threw it all off. Were you getting to roll your eyes? Vatican II. All right? We took it all off and ran around in play suits.
You're listening to Sunday Night Safran on Triple J.
Father Bob Maguire, can I talk about Amanda Palmer? Do you
I
know
think you
Amanda
ought to.
Palmer?
I think you
Amanda
ought to.
Palmer is an
No, it's
artist, a
Harvard.
musician, and she's always doing all different kinds of projects, and she gets in a bit of trouble because she crowdsources for money. Mm-hmm. So she goes, I've got this new album coming up, and can everyone please donate money so I can do it? And everyone's like, what the hell, man? And when she came and toured Australia, for instance, she tried to ask local musicians like, do you play a trumpet? Do you play a violin? How about coming up on stage during my concert? And we're like, whoa, hang on. No, you should pay for that or whatever. And she gets a lot of heat. And I think there's one angle on the whole rich people, or not rich, famous people in America crowdsourcing that we don't understand in Australia. And it's this. When you're an artist in like Australia or in Britain and in places like that, almost like the first port of call to try to get people to fund your projects is the government, whether it's like the BBC or their British film funding or in Australia, the ABC or the various bodies. So that's sort of like the path that you take in Australia. But in America, there's not things like that generally. And so if you're an American artist who's like the equivalent of the people who hit up for money from the BBC or the ABC, if you're in America, what you're doing is you go hit up like rich people.
Yes.
So you're either private, like Universal Pictures or Paramount or whatever. But if you're not, if you're like an independent filmmaker in America, you go and you pitch to like dentists and law firms and go,
Yes.
listen, wouldn't you like to get into the Hollywood industry, and all you have to do is fund this or whatever. And so I reckon Amanda Palmer hitting up punters for cash is like a smaller leap from that, if you know what I mean.
Of course.
Because that's what you do in America. You hit up ordinary people who happen to be rich usually, and so maybe we shouldn't be as harsh as Amanda Palmer. That's what I was thinking when I was watching, because she's once again basically holding out the cup.
Well, who are her main critics?
Oh, people just don't like. They find it tacky. They find
But when
it.
you say people don't, you mean in the
crass.
trade?
No, just regular people.
People?
Like on the internet. They're like, well, no, go to the record company Amanda Palmer and get that money.
Yes, I know.
What's his face also got, what's his name? Zach Braff. He used to be on Scrubs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he also, he got slapped around for trying to hit up.
What are they looking for? How much are they looking for?
They're usually looking for, a bit or whatever.
$100,000?
But don't you reckon there's also this other thing of when it all comes out in the wash, which is like you can just focus on one little thing and get annoyed, but let's look at the bigger picture. Like when it all comes out in the wash, aren't the kind of people who are going to pay Zach Braff or Amanda Palmer like $10 or $20 or even $50, even $100? Aren't they the kind of people who are going to, on the other hand, over their lives as a consumer of entertainment, sort of get a lot for free from the internet?
Yes.
Lit this for free. And, either it's for free and it's fine. Like Zach Braff has a blog and he tells his stories or whatever, and you get that for free.
Value for money.
Or, let's face it, dear listener, stop acting so innocent. We all know you illegally download Game of Thrones. So when it all comes out in the wash, are in fact these little people who are giving Amanda Palmer money or giving Zach... Is it even Zach Braff? Am I saying his name, or I'm getting him confused with... there's that hot guy who's a Zach? No, that's Zac Efron. I was just worried I was getting it. And it's Braff, not Baff. By the way, I'm not mad. I know this sounds to you that I'm
nice.
talking to the voices in my head, but I'm actually
that's all right.
I'm looking at Sir Pill, the producer, through the windscreen.
Yes.
Not the windscreen, that's the window.
The window.
And I'm asking her. So maybe when it all comes out in the wash, seeing you're just going to try to nick stuff off all these artists, like once they're done, maybe it's actually kind of fair enough and just, fine for Zach Braff and Amanda Palmer go, actually, before you can steal it, I'm going to try to get some coin out of you before the fact. Because once my Zach Braff's film is out there or Amanda Palmer's record out, there's no way you're going to pay for it then once you know you can nick it for free.
So it all evens out and it's a level playing. Thank you.
Dear listeners, you're listening to Triple J.
Transgenderism, this week on Sunday Night Safran. Triple J.
Still to come tonight, we'll be asking who gets to tell the transgender narrative. Here's what one famous American trans woman, Janet Mock, thinks.
When you package something with the headline, until 18 was a boy, and also say formerly a man, when in talking about my beloved, the love of my life, and our interaction together, that is false advertising, and that is infotainment, because I understand as someone who worked in media, who worked at People magazine,
Janet,
who worked as an editor, I understand that sensationalizing our stories entices people to look in.
Father Bob Maguire. That was trans woman Janet Mock, who certainly thinks it's sensationalism to mention a trans person's previous gender. Now, do you think writers and journalists, where do you think their responsibility lies, dear listeners, with the trans issue? Should they just be telling the narrative that people like Janet Mock want, or could they also be saying, hang on, I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, I like to write about things as I see them, and I can't reprogram my head, Janet Mock, to not think you were born a man or born male, Charles Mock. You can jump on Twitter at John Safran, at Father Bob, or at Soipl, Soipl. She's our producer. Tell us what you think. You're listening to Sunday Night Safran on Triple J with me, John Safran, and him.
Yeah.
What's your nun's name again?
Sister Roberta.
Sister Roberta.
Transgenderism, this week on Sunday Night Safran. Triple J.
Hey, Father Bob, speaking about self-identifying, I see Drake. You're familiar with Drake. He's a black American
No, I'm not.
rapper.
No.
and he was telling Macklemore, a white American rapper, to just calm down because Macklemore won the Grammy, and it was both directly spoken and sort of indirectly spoken that, you know, was it awful because he was white and he won against these black people. And the thing about black Americans that people have to get their heads around is lots of different ones with different opinions, and people have layers to themselves. It's not like just because you're, for instance, Tibetan or an African American that you just go around your entire life thinking earnestly about political and racial issues. Like you have other connections and other bonds, and you know, people are complicated. This makes sense to you, Bob?
Oh God, yes.
So he basically just said to Macklemore, chill out. He was presenting the African American, position that, you know, just calm down. It's not like everything is an insult to me as a black person. I was like, you won. I'm quoting Drake here. Why are you posting your text messages? He sent a text message to one of the rappers who lost. Just chill. Take your award. It felt cheap. It didn't feel genuine. Why do that? Why feel guilt, Macklemore? You think those guys would pay homage to you if they won? This is how the world works. He made a brand of music that appealed to more people than me. Kanye, Jay-Z and Kendrick. Whether people want to say it's racial or whether it's just the fact that he tapped into something we can't tap into, that's just how the cards fall. Own your shit.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it?
Yes. I just thought it was interesting because people are obsessed that if people are a member of a group, that like 24/7 full time, their whole brain space is just taken up with being like hyper, political and hyper self. It's just. But people are more complicated than that, Bob.
Indeed, we are.
Sunday night Safran on Triple J.
Now, Father Bob, in lizard news.
Lizard
news. And I know, dear listener, you're sick of me, like, tenuously bringing up lizard news, like Safran. Just because you see something posted on some freaking message board, that doesn't justify you doing a talk break about lizard people for the 10th millionth time. But this is, dear listener, just relax. This is worth it because it's got to do with Prime Minister John Key of New Zealand. An Official Information Act request was made to John Key's office asking for evidence disproving the Prime Minister was reptilian, and no evidence can be found. So this is what the letter from the Office of Prime Minister came. Dear Mr. Warbrook, he made the request. I refer to your email correspondence of the 7th of January 2014, in which under the Official Information Act you requested any evidence to disprove the theory that Mr. John Key is in fact a David Icke-style shape-shifting reptilian alien ushering humanity towards enslavement. I can confirm that no official information specific to your request has been identified. Accordingly, your request is formally declined under Section 18E of the Official Information Act that the document alleged to contain the information requested does not exist or cannot be found. You are entitled to ask the Ombudsman to review this response. Yours sincerely, Wayne Eagleson, Chief of Staff. Do you reckon that guy's a troll? Or do you reckon he really...
It's a bug. That's the beauties of a democracy, you see what I mean, isn't it?
Well
you
done.
Can ask anything, anytime, of anybody.
Well done, Shane Warbrook. Rather than like the goddamn Prime Minister's staff working on like unemployment or something like that, or saving trees or kiwis, they had to spend freaking half an hour typing up a letter.
But don't forget, this time last year we were on about lizards.
You're right.
And we had a lizard man sitting there in that seat next to me.
We can hardly take.
Now we're turning around. Spare me your sanctimony. Didn't we? Wasn't there a man there with a forked tongue? Very intelligent
I can't tell you how often, like, I want to be high and mighty about something, and then it's like, oh.
Hello, I've done that.
Damn, that's right. There was that thing with blackface in Chicago.
Yeah, exactly.
Or anything to do like, that artist is just, like, you shouldn't try to upset Christians, like it's just cheap. that crucifixion
Yeah.
in the Philippines.
isn't
And
it?
it's like, I just can't, again, like I want to get high and mighty
About the lizard, about Mr.
this guy
Keys.
wasting time about lizards,
and he
people.
sat there, what are you talking about? Good God. You got short-term memory loss.
I've told you this
And
before,
the whole of
Bob.
the United States government, you convinced me, were lizards.
I've told you this before, Bob, that my life has been filled with such sort of like just doing the wrong thing. That there's very few things I can take the high moral ground about anymore. Like one time I was asked, I sent a question, they said, hey, John, would you mind doing a public service announcement against, I think it was like taking drugs? And I thought, well, yeah, I kind of broadly agree with it, but what does it, like, hang on, if I put myself out there, is like some jerk from like 7 years ago going, well, Mr. La-di-da John, who I, went into the other room at that party and we sat under the Rage Against the Machine poster as I took up,
or
the
drank
pipe
peyote.
in the thing. Yes, and drank peyote. For God's sakes, exactly. Oh, yeah, Safran, yes, very anti-drug. Besides that bit where you spent 10 minutes vomiting out the peyote that you digested.
But that was for science, you see.
But and I realised the only thing I can ever advocate for, and not there be no skeletons in my closet, is I can be anti-murder. I can be really high, and that's why I'm a true crime writer. Really, it's like because I can like wag my finger at murderers, and no matter what happens, I'm just very safe knowing there's no skeletons in my closet.
Thank God.
Where someone's going to be able to say, well, that's very fine of you, John Safran, to take this high moral ground against dragging people into the back of trucks and then wearing their flesh as a skin suit and dancing around the well.
That's enough.
But I happen to know about your... Like, they won't be able to do that because I 100% am not a murderer. So don't murder kids.
No.
You're listening to Triple J.
Sunday Night Safran talks trans. Triple J.
You're listening to Sunday Night Safran, and joining us is Sean Flannery, who has been transitioning into a man for the past 2 years. Hello, Sean. Thanks for coming in to share such a personal story.
Hey, Sean.
Hi.
So give us the narrative.
Well, I started my journey a couple of years ago, and I started with coming out to my girlfriend of the time and letting her know what I was going through, and that didn't work out super well for me, but that's okay. And the next people I really went to was my parents. In between that, I went to a couple of good friends for support with the parents, and so I went and told them. And
I've noticed with some trans men and women, they feel it's I am a man or a woman, but I saw with some others, such as that high-level Australian Army transgender woman, Kate McGregor, that she just says, I live life as a woman, which is sort of like a distinction.
Yeah, I guess it's up to the individual what you like. I generally live life as a man, but I do acknowledge that I'm a trans man, and I like to talk about it, and I like people to know that. I don't like people to know that when they first meet me. I prefer to be like, hi, I'm Sean, get to know them, and then later I can disclose about myself and about my history, because I want them to just take me as a person rather than be thinking about whatever they might be thinking about if they find out that I'm trans.
It is interesting, I was thinking, how in the English language, for the plural, we have the word they, which means you can skirt around male or female. You can say they over there. But when it comes to the singular, we don't have a unisex singular. So it kind of really pushes the issue that people have to make a decision about how they're going to refer to themselves and how they're going to refer to others. Do you find a lot of people stumbling around?
Yes. The longer I've been on testosterone, the less I have that as an issue. People often look at me now and assess that I'm a guy and go with he, so we don't have to have an awkward conversation straight up when we've just met.
And do you think you should be on the front foot and you should be saying, "Oh, listen,
I know you might be wondering or whatever, or like in your ideal world, how would it all play out?
Ideally, people would ask you what you want to be called or referred to as when they meet you, because I don't really believe in the gender binary. It's not actually a thing, even though we're taught that in school and it's ingrained in all of our brains. It's not like you can see me sitting here and I am evidence that the gender binary is not a thing. So, yeah, if you just meet people and you say, hi, it's nice to meet you, how would you like me to refer to you?
But why would, seeing it's such a small percentage of people who don't think, oh, listen, it's unambiguous, I'm a man, it's unambiguous, I'm a woman, because it's such a small percentage of people, why do you think the world almost like has to backward engineer into that?
Well, there's also intersex people, which is another ball game, and that's actually...
I guess it's sort of like the equivalent of, like, do all McDonald's have to suddenly think that there's Jewish people out there and blah, blah, or rather, do Jewish people just being 1% of the population have to say, okay, I got it, this is how most of the world operates, so I'm going to try to work around this?
Yeah, I read a stat that there's more intersex people, well, similar amount or more than there are people with Down syndrome, but people who are intersex don't necessarily disclose that around the place because it can cause them issues in life. And it's the same with trans people. It's, like, I think it's a hidden issue. People don't realise how many trans people there are out there. So, I don't know. Ideally, I think it would go that way. It's not going to, but it would be nice.
And there's a lot of discrimination, obviously, like totally separate from, having these little debates about how things should be referred to as. It's, like high suicide rate, high rate of discrimination.
Yeah. There's joblessness, homelessness, depression, other mental health issues. I don't know the exact stats, but there's a lot.
And do you think that's mainly tied in with the wider community not understanding or accepting transgender men or women, or would that be happening independent of that?
I think it happens for a bunch of reasons. I think one big thing is the wider community, but then people have got their families and how their families accept or don't accept them, and their whatever communities they're from, whether they're from religious communities or other sorts of particular communities that might have an issue with where they're coming from. And
I don't think you heard it, but before we had on a professor, and she was just saying that, listen, if you're a transgender woman, you have to accept you are a man and you have all the power of a man, and was seeing things through that lens. And I asked her whether she thought, life's more complicated, but she said no.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it is. I think if you become a trans woman, you're giving up all your male privilege that you might have had if you didn't acknowledge yourself as a woman. And male privilege is a pretty powerful thing to have in life. So I don't think you would do that lightly.
And how has transitioning been? Is it a dangerous thing?
I haven't found it dangerous, but I'm very lucky. I live in Melbourne, and we've got a fairly big community in Melbourne of trans guys. I know more trans guys than I know trans women, but there's also a large trans community, lots of genderqueer people, and I haven't ever felt unsafe in Melbourne anywhere, ever.
Sure. And did it change friendships when you started transitioning?
Not really. So a couple of my friends had some trouble accepting it, especially my longer term friends. I don't really recall losing any friends, but I sort of don't think anything of it. If they're gone because of that, then they weren't very good friends.
And what about family?
Family's been great. My parents were a lot more accepting than I expected them to be. They do struggle and have had a hard time with it. My sisters, I've got 3 sisters, and they've all been amazing advocates, really strong with their language around me. They say, hey, this is my brother Sean, before people can say anything, so that people just don't get it wrong around me. Even people from the past show up at parties and things, and they just step in and say, hey, this is my brother.
And I guess, so why is it important to be a man?
Well, it's not important to be a man. For me, I just identify as a man. So it's just being true to myself and to who I am. So it's not really about whether it's important or not.
Sure. And are there different realms? So for instance, in the personal realm, it's good for people to sort of go along, because it's fairly low stakes, to kind of go along with whatever a person's personal narrative is. But there's other realms. Like, for instance, I spoke to a pharmacist this week, and I was talking about what's happening on the show, and she just said, listen, men and women, their bodies react differently to some drugs. So it's really important. It doesn't matter whether a transgender woman thinks she's a woman or a transgender man thinks she's a man, that in that realm, they're still going to remain the opposite.
Yeah. I've got a really good GP at the Northside Clinic, which is a sort of queer-friendly clinic, and she's really lovely in that she will treat me like there's things I don't want to do, like pap smears. I still should. I don't have to. She won't make me, but she will remind me if that's a thing that's coming up. She'll be like, hey, you should do that. It's a good idea. And she'll still look at parts of my body that exist, if they still exist.
Bob, because I guess our first guest was just saying, listen, I as a feminist, I as a woman, don't want to accept transgender women as women. Do you think there's a distinction between being a transgender woman, and being a transgender man and being a man?
Not really, no. Like, as we were saying, in the clinical side of the world, there is a difference, and your GP needs to know, and your pharmacist needs to know things about you. But, like, I said to my mum once, like, you don't ask your boss to take his pants off before you accept that he's a man standing there talking to you, do you? Like, you just accept that he's a man. It's really got nothing to do with what's under his clothes. It's got to do with how you interact with each other and that sort of thing, the social cues that he gives you about how he wants to be spoken to. So it doesn't really actually matter where he's coming from as a man.
Sure.
Should we end up with name tags or something, all of us? Wouldn't it make it...
It might make it easier.
I'm getting confused because I'm old, but I'm saying, what does it matter?
Well, no, Bob. That's like the easy thing to say.
I'm gone. 1934, blown out of the bloody water already. Only opened my mouth once.
Okay, no, go on. Go on. No, like for instance, with the pharmacy thing, like that.
Oh no, I understand that with relationships. I presume, I don't know, with pharmacists. When you get to the airport, I presume the nice man there.
I had a really interesting thing happen at the airport. I was going to Bali, and they did the body scan thing and looked at me. I don't know how it works exactly, and as I understand, what happens after that is you get patted down. And the woman looked at me and said, "Stand over here, please." And she got the man, and he came over and looked at me, looked confused, and then was like, "Just keep going, it's all right," and just waved me on, and neither of them touched me. I think they couldn't decide what I was, and therefore who should do the patting down of me.
Yes.
They could have asked, I suppose.
If you get arrested, do you want to go into a male prison or a female prison?
A male prison. I'd prefer not to be in that situation, though, because it sounds horrifying.
Indeed.
What's it like to know? Because I think that a lot of people are like, I want someone to be comfortable. I respect them. I respect there's all different sorts of ways of looking at the world. And that if a person feels like they're a man or they feel like they're a woman, like they're totally cool with that. But if you actually strapped them to a lie detector and said, do you believe Janet Mock was born a woman? Or do you believe that Sean Flanagan... These are a bit different because you don't deny that you were born a boy. But they would say, well, ultimately, no, I do actually think a transgender woman was born a man and then decided that they want to be a woman. Because that's the end game of people like Janet Mock. The end game is she ultimately wants the wider community not to think of a transgender woman as anything but a woman now and was always a woman. And then making it even a bit more kind of complicated, she thinks that if a transgender woman has male genitals, she is still, like, that is indistinguishable from a woman because in her head she's a woman. And that a transgender woman who has a penis and sleeps with sleeps with men, is a straight woman. Like, that's sort of like the end game of people like Janet Mock. And I was reading the gay and lesbian, the GLAD media rules for how you should discuss trans issues. And that's how ultimately they'd like us to see the world. And is that like just sort of kind of asking too much, I guess?
I don't know. When I'm talking about my friends who are trans, I use the pronouns that they prefer, and I won't say my friend so-and-so, she's a trans woman as a qualifying statement. I will just say my friend so-and-so and she, or he, if that's what they prefer. So I just see it as that. And I don't really know what Janet Mock, I haven't really read a lot of things that she's said, but I watched that thing when she was on that talk show. And I felt like what she was getting at was that he sort of was focusing on when you turned 18, you had surgery, and that's when you became a woman. And she kind of looked awkward and, you know, like, I'm sitting here telling you that I'm a guy and I'm pre-surgery. I'm hopefully having chest surgery next year. So that will be great, but it's not like I'm going to go around saying, well, I'm a girl until I've had chest surgery, because what's under my clothes is really between me and who has to see under my clothes, which is maybe sexual partners and my doctor. And aside from that, you can take me as what you see over my clothes, because we don't have that kind of a relationship. So I think what she was sort of getting at is that she identified as female a long time before she had surgery on her genitalia, but he was kind of saying, you know, and the thing was showing up on the screen saying, was a boy until 18. It just kept saying that, apparently, throughout the interview on the screen. And it's like, well, she wasn't a boy until she was 18. You know, she was maybe a boy when she was really little. And then at some point she started acknowledging that she identified as female, and she started dressing as a female. And whether she had a penis or not really is none of our business, because we don't engage with her in any way that it would be our business what's under her skirt or her pants or whatever she's wearing.
Thank you very much for telling us that perspective. Really appreciate you coming in.
Thanks very much.
Transgenderism, this week on Sunday Night Safran. Triple J.
You're listening to Sunday Night Safran with myself, John Safran, and what's the nun's name?
Sister Roberta.
And we've been talking transgender issues all night. But what are the rules about talking about transgender issues? Are there any? Should there be any? What do you think? Go on Twitter and let us know. At John Safran, at Father Bob, or at Soipel, Soipl. She's a producer. This is what transgender activist Janet Mock thinks.
I did not identify or live my life as a boy. As soon as I had enough agency in my life to grow up, I became who I am. And this did not start at 18 when I went to Thailand to have surgery. It started when I was 6 years old, and my parents saw me for who I was and allowed me to live my life. That's a lot of nuance, and it's hard to communicate that in 30 seconds or even in a 140-character tweet. That's why I'm here right now. I want this to be a learning and teaching moment for all of us, because there's a lot of misunderstanding. Just as much as you were vilified, or as you say from my supporters, that's actually my community, who are vilified every single day and misunderstood and drove into isolation and told that who they are is incorrect and wrong and should be under investigation.
Shortly we'll talk to journalist and author Jeff Sparrow about what obligations writers have or don't have when they report on issues such as transgender issues.
Transgenderism, this week on Sunday Night Safran. Triple J.
Where have you been this week? Anywhere or nowhere?
Where have I been this week?
Yeah, have you been anywhere? Because you always go interesting places. I've been nowhere. I only went to the State Library and sat out on the lawn and I read chapters of my book.
Well,
If you must know, and this is I know my frenemies who listen are going to try to trip me up and try to like write letters complaining that I'm bringing this up. But do you know what I was really doing this week? Seeing you bother to ask, going through the manuscript of my book and rewriting it for America, changing
that's big, isn't it?
Changing petrol to gas,
Yeah.
and then trying to work out the logic because it's like if I'm an Australian in America, do I pull up at a gas station or a petrol station?
See, it must be exhausting, mustn't it?
No, it's pretty relaxing actually.
Yeah, bit of fun even. Yeah. So when are you going to launch it at America?
In the fall, if you must know.
In the fall, is it?
In the fall.
Oh, in the fall. Yeah.
They've gotten rid of the original title, by the way. It's not going to be called the title.
Murder in Mississippi.
No, because apparently that's a very dull title to American ears. Because like to Australian ears, we're like Mississippi, exotic.
Yeah, exactly.
But apparently to American ears, it's like if we called the book Murder in New South Wales, they'd be like, what? Like, but to their ears, New South Wales would sound
exotic.
Ooh, Wales.
Yeah. Have you got? You won't leak the name, of course.
No, I won't.
No, I don't think so.
Because that will cross a line of promoting.
I think so.
Jared Leto heckled, accused of trans misogyny at a Santa Barbara event, which is he's an actor, and he played a transgender woman in a film, the Dallas Buyers Club, and an activist said a man shouldn't play a transgender woman, even though people would argue a transgender woman is someone who was a man who became a woman, so why can't Jared Leto, as a man, be a trans? That's how complicated it gets.
Yeah, it's really very complicated.
Josh Whedon, who I think directed The Avengers, created Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and he was asked on Twitter, Josh, any advice on writing strong female leads in a comic book? #love Buffy. Josh Whedon got back. Must value strength, but also community, and not have peenie and balls. So that was his little joke at the end. And then some transgender women were not happy. So even though Josh Whedon was talking about something totally out of the context of any political or transgender issues, really, Josh Whedon? Really? Josh Whedon, basically saying he's a cis-sexist, trans-misogynistic, transphobe. He should apologise for the tweet. So, what do you think?
Apologies for everything, isn't it?
Didn't you have a transgender
I did.
person in your congregation?
Yes, of course. Who came up and
please
saw...
go.
Oh, no, I can't. It's secret, isn't it?
Yeah. But
no names. A truck driver, a very big person. I've got to be careful with my own language, you see, who came and said, listen, by the way, blah, 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 I am in the course of I think in those days they were called transsexuals. And I will be away and da-da-da-da-da. When I come back, I will be dressed in women's clothes and my name will be such and such. So she wanted to know whether I felt that it would be uncomfortable for the rest of the congregation who was used to him being a big man driving a truck. He would turn up in the church dressed as a woman carrying an handbag. And I said, it's got nothing to do, everybody, you can come as you are. And it was quite fascinating to see, because as a working class area, blue collar, and with snide remarks and things about almost everything, not only about gender, but about politics and about whatever, football clubs and all the rest of it. Nope, went off seamlessly. So I thought that was brilliant.
Kate McGregor, Lieutenant Colonel Kate McGregor, the highest-ranking transgender officer in the Australian Army. She wrote that great speech that got a lot of pats on the back for, remember when the head of the Army released that video, he said, if you have a problem with women, "Get out." Do you remember that? It was such a good performance.
Yes.
I jumped behind the couch. I was scared for weeks that I was going to, walk down the street.
Sunday night Safran talks trans. Triple J.
And joining us now is author and journalist Jeff Sparrow.
Thanks for coming in.
No worries, thanks for having me.
Jeff Sparrow. Now, one of the things that started me off on this whole mental journey of transgender issues was an article that was on a sports website about a golf club that was invented and designed by this woman. And a journalist went to investigate this because they were making big claims about this new golf club, and that a woman, her name was S.A. Ann Vanderbilt, that because she had previously worked, I think, for the Department of Defense in America, and she'd been in aerospace engineering and stuff, and she'd brought all these skills to create this new golf club that was better than any golf club that had ever existed before. And anyway, this sports journalist started poking around the past of Miss S.A. Ann Vanderbilt and found out that there wasn't really things to verify that she'd ever worked at the Department of Defense, and there were other things in her CV that didn't add up. And then he found out that S.A. Ann Vanderbilt was born male, and the way he framed it in the article was arguably that, well, this was another one of her secrets about her running away from her past. And in her past, there were things such as embezzling money or ripping off people and stuff. And so he kind of framed S.A. Ann Vanderbilt's transgenderism as another thing of hiding from her past. And the story didn't end well because S.A. Ann Vanderbilt was apparently so stressed out about this article that was going to come out that it played a part, people don't know how much, but played a part on her deciding to kill herself. And then the issue came up of, well, are you allowed to out a transgender person if you're writing a story about them?
Well, look, I don't claim to be any great expert on transgender issues, and I don't want to present myself as that, but I think there are a few basic journalistic and editorial rules that apply. And really, in some ways, I've been thinking about this a bit. I don't actually think it's that hard. And in fact, the rules on some of these are some really old, journalistic rules establishing things like police rounds. There's nothing PC or anything like that. It's just that if you're a journalist, if you're an editor, and you're working with a story concerning a vulnerable person or a vulnerable group, then you have to be cognizant of that in your writing. And we know that the transgender population are subject to a great deal of interpersonal violence from friends and loved ones and strangers in the street. We also know that they're at a high rate of self-harm. So when you know that, well, it has consequences for the kind of work you do as a journalist or editor. I'll give you an example of how it might play out in a different circumstance. If you were a police journalist and you were doing a story on someone who was, say, a whistleblower in the mafia, everybody involved in that story would be damn sure that nothing went to air or went to press that would identify who that person was. Because if you did reveal the identity of this person, you would potentially have, the ill consequences that they suffered would be on your hands. And it seems to me it's not an exact analogy, but quite simply, if you're working with a population that you think that they might suffer as a result of your reporting, any decent person would take precautions to ensure that didn't happen. It just doesn't seem very complicated.
But is it just an impossible expectation for a transgender man or woman to have that if they're going to be in the public eye, that it won't be spoken about? Is that just an unrealistic expectation? And so therefore, it's to mentally prepare that actually you don't particularly have a right to not be described as transgender.
Well, first of all, an awful lot of transgender people are not in the public eye. They're just going about their lives like anybody else does. And one of the things you do as a journalist or as an editor all the time is you make decisions about what's newsworthy and what's not.
And so in this case, Dr. S.A. Ann Vanderbilt had stamped her name on the golf club, and the golf club was promoted under her name. And so I guess, and she was a business person who was going to profit a lot from this golf club. And so I get that's sort of public eye, isn't it?
I don't really see how the gender identification had anything to do with that story at all. Look, I'll give you another example. Again, if you were doing a report on somebody who had been hit by a car, you would not report that person was gay. You would not say, John Smith was knocked down by a car. Oh, by the way, he was gay. It has nothing to do with the story. So as a judge, you make a decision. This is not part of the story, but it's nobody else's business.
But if you're writing a profile piece about a person, which this golf story became, aren't things like that fair enough? Because you're building a picture of the person. Like, for instance, does Penny Wong have a right, or should she have this expectation that if someone writes a profile piece on her, that it's not going to be brought up that she's Asian?
See, I think we writers like to think that we're tremendously important, and we all like to think that we're breaking the Watergate story and that our words have to be out there. And I think writers have to get over themselves most of the time that the things that we're writing about are not that important. This was a story about a golf club. But somebody's life is more important than whether a golf club is good or not.
Yes.
So
but there's a lot of tangles in that, because there's, for instance, there's the tangle of that she committed, like we're just taking it, that she committed suicide because the story was going to come out, when really it was a lot messier than that when you read the whole story.
I'm not making a judgment about
like
that.
way before this journalist had met her, she'd attempted suicide before. So there was a lot of messiness in it.
No, but I'd put it like this. If you were breaking a really important story about international politics that have consequences for, heads of states, and, if you're WikiLeaks, for instance, and you're releasing the Iraq war logs, and there's a possibility that people might be injured as a result of the stuff that you're disclosing. Okay, then you make a judgment and you weigh up, are the possible consequences, how do they weigh up according to the newsworthiness of this material that I'm weighing up? I think in the WikiLeaks story, they made the correct call. The material they were releasing was significantly important, had a news value enough that it deserves to be released. I think a profile that you're writing simply to get clicks to somebody's news site doesn't fall into that category. I mean, I really do not think that, that you can make a call that a story about whether one golf club is better than another golf club is significantly important, that you have a right to risk somebody else's well-being for it.
I guess so. But again, the hard thing is that he was not to know that she was to kill herself, which makes it...
No, but I mean...
So for instance, does every writer just have to go into everything and just assume that if something comes out, the person's going to kill themselves? So
No. But I mean, this was one of the points that the critics of that article made. I don't think that article was written out of malice. I think that actually one of the things about Grantland, that magazine, most of the people involved in it were quite young. This guy was an aspiring journalist who'd been trying to write this story for a long time, and there'd been a lot of back and forth between him and the editorial staff, and quite clearly the story was getting out of control. And you can see that as you read through the story. He's not clear what the story is about. But what the critics were saying is, no, he probably didn't think that this was going to have the consequence that it did, but if you're writing in this area, journalists have a responsibility to educate themselves in the same sort of way. If you were doing crime journalism and you were reporting on someone in witness protection, you couldn't just say, well, I had no idea that this would happen. Well, you should have known that it would. And it, maybe not the journalist, but somebody at the magazine should have stepped in and said, hang on a minute, this is not right.
He was doing the profile. He was surely able to say, listen, I did the backstory and I found out that this woman's claims to be this academically, that's false, that's false, that's false, that's false, that's false.
Yes.
She still designed a magnificent putter.
Yes.
But then you needn't go the next step and say, and by the way,
my understanding of it from reading that story, one of the things the journalist did was to out this transgender woman's birth identity to a business partner is clearly an ethical breach. There is no necessity for that. There's no news value in doing it. And quite clearly, when you read the reaction of the editorial staff, they hadn't thought the thing through. They clearly hadn't known what they were doing. And I think in retrospect, they should have known that. I mean, one of the things that editors have had to do, most publications, well, all publications have had to develop style manuals, protocols for dealing with issues of gender and race and all the rest of it. Well, I think there's a lot of journalists that haven't done that around issues of transgender rights. And clearly that story was a wake-up call. You need to do it.
A writer's not allowed to just go into the world and write stories. Well, like is everything some hard-nosed journalism thing, and therefore, if it doesn't tick the box of hard-nosed journalism, because I would compare this Grantland story, this in some ways. Imagine if someone went down to their local beach and they saw, oh my God, there's all these 90-year-old people who turn up every weekend and play drafts and feed bread to the duck or whatever, something kind of interesting, and they go there and they paint this portrait of what happens in that little world. And that's not like a hard-hitting journalism story, but it's a story about the world. And it seems like this story about the golf industry ticked a lot of boxes for being, I mean, it was quite an interesting story about what happens in the golf industry and in the golf club industry. I mean, who knew? Who knew there was like these wars going on with the putters and then here's this woman who's come along and it's a male-dominated world and she's got to the head of the pack and she's in the... It just seemed like an interesting enough story to tell. And why tell stories about anything?
Okay, there's a lot in there to unpack. But the first thing, are writers not allowed to do this? Well, there are no writer police, you know. And in fact, the vast majority of journalists, reporters out there in the world aren't actually bound by any ethical scruples whatsoever. I mean, if you were talking about a tabloid journalist, as we saw with all those revelations about the Murdoch tabloids in Britain, they would have no compunctions about outing someone. They have no compunctions about tapping your phone. So actually, people will do this stuff all the time. The question we're talking about is whether they should. And that's a different question. Yes, you can write about these things. The question about whether you should do it is a completely different matter. And the judgment that I would make is if there was a risk that reporting in this way would lead to someone injuring themselves or being injured, well, you know, the prurient value that there might be in people being interested in this person's transgender status is neither here nor there. I mean, if I were writing a story about Bob and John Safran, I could lots of people would be interested in details of your personal life if I had them at my fingertips. That wouldn't justify me including them. I might get more clicks if I do so, or sell more newspapers, but, you know, that's not ethical to do that.
Just seems like really wobbly, especially in the new world where it's so easy to post things. I've been on trains where people have taken photos of me from across the way and then it's on Twitter. It just seems like that's almost like another aspect about this whole, you know, can you out people or can you not? Like in the new world, it seems like there's such. Well, it's an unrealistic expectation.
Well, but again, you can't confuse the question of what we should do from the question of what actually happens. And one of the interesting things about that Grantland piece, my understanding of it, the young guy who was doing that story was not a traditionally trained reporter. I'm pretty sure he was someone coming through one of those creative writing courses in nonfiction. Now, very often, if that's your background, you haven't actually thought through ethical issues and you don't have the kind of training that a traditional journalist might have in these sorts of issues. And again, I don't think there was any malice in that story. I think there was ignorance in that story. But, you know, if you're writing about people's lives, you do have a responsibility to think about the consequences in this issue as in any other issue.
Thank you very much for joining us, Jeff Sparrow.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
In my head, just beforehand, I won every argument with you, but it did not seem to...
A discussion.
Yeah, it did not play out that way, but that's okay. As soon as you go,
you'll make sure that's
I'll
known.
continue the argument and I'll win it because you won't be here to provide any counterpoints. Thank you very much for joining us,
no worries.
Jeff Sparrow.
Sunday night, Safran talks trans. Triple J.
Father Bob Maguire.
Yes, Bob.
Now that Jeff has left, I can continue.
That's right. You want to win the argument.
Win the argument, and now that he's not here,
yes, it's easier.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Jeff, I just feel that sometimes a story uses the tools of journalism, but it's actually telling a story, and that when you tell a story, you are allowed to look at things such as the physicality of a person. So for instance, in this Grantland golf story, Jeff, the fact that she was transgender actually is kind of an interesting detail. I don't know why, but it kind of is.
Yes.
Like, just say The Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know if you've seen that film.
Seen of it.
So the main dude in that, he's Jewish, and his friends are Jewish. And so do you kind of micromanage that out and kind of go, well, it's not really relevant that he's Jewish? And even further than that, it looks bad because they're embezzling money and stereotypes about Jews. Or do you just say, well, actually, no, you do put that in because it kind of says something about him. It doesn't say things like, that means all Jews are thieves.
No.
But for instance, it could say he felt like an outsider growing up,
Indeed.
being Jewish,
Thank you.
being part of the main culture, or he felt he had to try harder. So that was part of what made him who he was as this character. What was his name? Belmont, blah, whatever his name was.
Yes.
And so similarly, I wonder whether this trans woman who designed the golf club, that it did play a part in who she was. It's interesting, but just like you're interesting, Bob. I don't think it's particularly more interesting or stranger than your decision to live life as a priest. Or my decisions to do the things I did.
You should say that. That's what people stick the tag on me all the time. So I'd prefer to be called Bob Maguire. They say, no, you're known as Father Bob Maguire. See what I mean? Now, that's profiling, but I mean, I can't complain about that.
Transgenderism, this week on Sunday Night Safran. Triple J.
Now, Bob, you laughed at McAuliffe this week.
I liked McAuliffe.
You said you hadn't been laughing for 2 months.
2 months with all of that politics and fascism and oh dear.
Did I ever tell you how I ruined McAuliffe's sketch?
How?
Because he approached me, but I was on a documentary show, and then I came off it. And anyway, long story. He asked me to be in this sketch, but I didn't have enough television experience. Like, I'd just been on the TV, but as a documentary maker, and so he wanted to do this thing. I couldn't not laugh. Like, I could not. So they had like a truck. So the joke was he was going to come outside my house and and attack me like I'd attacked Ray Martin. Anyway, done those twisted Sean McHale things. It was really funny, right? And so this big production van comes, and they set up these lights, and they've got everything, and there's a crew of, huge crew. And then every time he walks in, just because I thought Sean McAuliffe was so funny, I just went, and they'd have to go, okay, cut. Yes. And it just went on for like half an hour. I couldn't not laugh. And, it never made it.
No,
to
it was
the
beautiful.
Final show.
It was beautiful.
So sorry everyone there that day.
He had many interviews from, what do you call the Admiral somebody or other out there floating around there who couldn't answer any questions because a breach of security. But went on and on. I was delighted.
What did you laugh at as a child?
Well, not Shirley Temple. God rest her soul, even though she was dancing around singing, on the motor ship, a lollipop.
Do you know that Shirley Temple was in a...
We laughed at... Well, I'm trying to think.
Do you know around this... The Wizard of Oz, like the most famous film of all time?
Yes.
There was a Shirley Temple kind of parallel universe film that was put out there called The Blue Robin or something.
Yeah.
I forget what it was, but like the whole thing was going to be... This was going to be the biggest film ever made, and it was going to blow out, the Wizard of Oz. And it just... But then in this unexpected twist, the Wizard of Oz became big.
No, it was lovely. Who did we used to laugh at? Oh, we had some ridiculous things in the old days. Like
Zig and Zag?
Nah, long before Zig and Zag. George Formby? You've never heard of George Formby?
The grill?
No, George Formby, I said. They play the mouth organ or something. And what's their names? Fat and Skinny, we called them. Who are they? Stan
Laurel and Hardy.
Yes! Pure and simple stuff, you know what I mean? None of this innuendo or filth or none of that. No, we just laughed at Adolf Hitler with Charlie Chaplin. Mm-hmm. All of that. See, what you see today, sitting in the studio, at the age of 80, is the sum total of the accumulated humour since 1934. You see? Mm. So if you needed an explanation for my brilliance as a humorist, you have it there. Thank you. Good night. It's time to wrap up, Johnny. Let's thank our guests for tonight. Professor Sheila Jeffreys, author of Gender Hurts, trans man Sean Flannery, author and journalist Jeff Sparrow. You can keep in touch with us via our Twitters. Send us a tweet at Father Bob or at John Safran. You can also tweet our producer at Soipel, Soipl. John?
Yeah, thanks, everyone. I hope the show made sense tonight.
Yeah, I kept telling you over and over again.
What?
That show made sense. It was scintillating.
It's just sometimes I feel like...
I know you do.
Like I've slurred and stuttered and didn't get my thoughts out that well. But if you say so, I trust you.
Reassure. Would I tell you a lie? Of course not.
Next up, stay tuned for Fenella Kernebone.
Hello, Fenella.
On Sound Lab. That's it from us.
Catch you next week, kiddies.